Sarah's Aunt Mindy owns a cabin on a mountain in Montana. And so we've been there lots of times. One time when we were there, we were sitting around in the living room of the cabin and I was looking outside and the moon started to come up over the mountaintops. And the moon was full and it was bright and it was absolutely beautiful. Fortunately, Mindy had a telescope sitting there, so I asked her if I could take her telescope and go look at the moon, and she said sure. So I grabbed the telescope, went out in the yard, and I trained it on the full moon that was rising in the east, and to this day, I remember exactly what the moon looked like through that telescope, because I saw the moon that night in a way I had never seen it before. The moon is in our sky most nights, and most days I don't even pay any attention to it. I might see it, I might look at it, but I don't think much about it. But that night I saw it in a different way, and I have not forgotten what it looked like. I think the best sermons do something similar. And the best sermons are not the ones that tell you something you've never heard before. Rather, I think the best sermons are those that take something that is quite common, that you already know, and help you to see it in a different way, in a better way, in a more detailed way. I hope that's what this sermon does today. Because as we enter into a new year, I want to talk to you about an attitude that gets talked about quite a bit. But I don't think we really understand why this is as important as it really is. And so I want to help you see this very common attitude in a new way so that maybe it changes the way you approach everything else in this year. We're going to learn this lesson from an incident that happened in Jesus' life, took place near the end of his life. We're going to read about it from Luke chapter 17. We're going to start in verse 11, and it says this. Now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. So he's been in the northern part of the country, he's traveling to the south towards Jerusalem. It says, as he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. This is an important detail. Leprosy in those days was considered very contagious, and the only way they could deal with it was to quarantine people. If you were diagnosed with leprosy, you had to leave your community. You had to leave your family. You had to leave your job. You had to go out. And you had to stay away from other people. The fact that there are 10 of these leprous men together is simply that they needed each other. They were the only ones they could hang out with. That was the only community they could have. They could only be with other lepers because they had to stay away from all others. And so this group of 10 men who have lost everything hear that Jesus is nearby. And so they come and they make a plea to him. They stand far off, because they have to, that's the law, and they yell at him and say, the men called out in a loud voice and said, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. Verse 14, when he saw them, he said, go, show yourselves to the priests. That may not mean much to us, but to them that would have been crazy. Again, in those days, if you're a leper, the reason you go show yourself to a priest is that your leprosy is gone. They had to go and get a certificate of cleanliness from the priest so that they could go back to the normal life if somehow their leprosy ever left them, which it usually didn't. But if it did, they could go show themselves to a priest, get a letter of cleanliness, and go back home and back to their lives. But these men still had leprosy, and Jesus says, go show yourself to the priest as if you're clean. It's a weird thing to say. And even stranger is what they do next. It says, and as they went, I really like that. Here are these 10 lepers who have no business being in town, no business being near people, who are still leprous. They're heading towards the priest to have him see if they're clean or not, because Jesus told them to. The next part is even cooler. It says, as they went, they were cleansed. Can you imagine that? Again, you've lost everything, and now you're whole again. You're healed, you're healthy. You can go back home. You can go back to your wife and kids. You can go back and hug them, and you can go back to your job, and you've got your life back. Can you imagine what that would be like? Can you imagine what your reaction would be? Luke tells us what the reaction of one of them was. It says in verse 15, one of them, when he saw that he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. This one man, before he does anything else, he comes rushing back to Jesus and is so thankful that he falls at his feet and praises God, and probably a big uproar, telling everybody how great God is and how great Jesus is and what an amazing thing this was. Luke adds one other detail. It says, and he was a Samaritan. The Samaritans were a group of people that the Jewish people disliked and in fact would avoid most of the time. It seems by Luke saying that this man was a Samaritan, he implies that the other 9 were Jews. If you were to ask a Jewish person who was going to do the right thing, they would never have said it was the Samaritan. They would have said the Jewish people will do what they should, but they didn't. It's the foreigner who comes back and falls down and praises God. And then something else happens. And this is the part I want you to think about today in a way maybe you've not thought about it before. Here's the next bit. It says this. Jesus asked, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? Jesus is upset here because something wonderful has happened. They've been given a blessing that they could never have hoped for, and only one has returned. 90% of them, 9 out of the 10, just didn't bother. They just went on their way. They just did whatever they wanted to do afterwards. And Jesus says, weren't you all cleansed? Weren't all 10 cleansed? Where are the rest? Where are the rest? This bothers him. This is important. Where are the rest of them? Why didn't they come back? I want to ask you a question. Why is Jesus so concerned that they didn't come back and thank him? What's going on here? Is Jesus just being petty? Is he just healing people so that they come back and thank him and fall at his feet? Is that what's happening? No. Is Jesus just being needy and saying, well, I did this good thing and you gotta... No, that's not what's happening. Is Jesus just being a stickler for manners and saying, well, the nice thing to do is you should have come back? Is that what he's just being picky? Is that what's happening here? No. Jesus is concerned that 9 of the 10 did not express their gratitude for this one reason. Gratitude is a measurement of your spiritual understanding and maturity. The level of gratitude that we live with indicates how well we understand who God is, what he is doing, and what is happening in our lives. And Jesus is upset because most of them didn't get it. Most of them didn't understand. Most of them didn't react properly. And that means that most of them don't really know what they think they know about God and about themselves. Let me give you an illustration here that will help a little bit, hopefully, as we talk about this a little bit more. On this shelf behind me is something called a Galileo thermometer. I love Galileo thermometers. I've had several of these. It's a really neat little thing. The principle here is really simple. Galileo thermometer is filled with 4 spheres that are weighted differently. And then they're put in a liquid. And when the liquid is cold, it is more dense. And when it is more dense, all of these little spheres float. But as the room warms up, as it is right now, the liquid becomes less dense and the balls start to drop. The spheres start to go down. So the way you use a Galileo thermometer is you look at the level at which the spheres are floating, and then you tell what the temperature is. And so in here right now, this is a Fahrenheit one, it's about 76 degrees. This only works on one principle. It only works because the liquid in the tube here reacts to the room temperature. And it reacts in a consistent way all the time. It does the exact same thing all the time. It responds to what's going on around it. And because it responds, then it is useful. If this liquid didn't expand with the heat, then this wouldn't work. If it didn't respond, it would be useless. But because it responds properly, then we've been using these things since the 1600s to tell what temperature it is. A Galileo thermometer, or any thermometer, works on the principle that it responds to the air temperature around it, and that's how you can tell how warm it is. Jesus' concern here is that those who were healed didn't respond properly, and therefore they show that they don't understand and have not grown up spiritually yet. I imagine, and this is just my imagination, but I imagine if you were to find those 9 other guys and ask them if anything good had happened to them lately, they would celebrate. They would be thankful. They would be glad that they were no longer lepers living out in a colony somewhere. But here's the issue. They were thankful, but they forgot to display it. They forgot to say it. They forgot to express it. They just moved on. Has that ever happened with you? You've got some sort of problem. This happens with me all the time. I've got a list of problems, a list of concerns, things that I want sorted out, and I start praying about them, and I pray about the thing that's top of my list, the worst thing that I'm concerned about, and I pray about that, and I pray about the next thing, and I pray about the next thing, and guess what happens? Oftentimes the thing at the top of my list, the thing that I was most concerned about, works out. My prayer's answered. Everything's okay. It turns out fine. And do you know what I do most of the time? Do you know what I do 9 times out of 10? I just move on and start worrying about the next thing on my list. I might think for half a second, boy, that's really good that turned out. Thanks God for working that out. Now can you work this one out? My gratitude level isn't high enough though. I just move to the next problem and I bring up the next worry and then I worry about that. And it's an indication that I'm not seeing things properly. It's an indication that I'm missing something. The fact that only one of them came back and praised God in front of everybody else is a problem. The old-time preacher, Henry Ward Beecher, once said that a proud man is rarely a grateful man. And I think that's really our issue, right? A proud man is really never a grateful man. Beecher goes on to say, for he thinks that he gets as much as he deserves. I don't know about you, but that's probably true of me. I'm not as grateful as I should be because I think I got what I deserved. I think I worked for it. I think I've done something. I think I've been the one who brought about all these good things in my life, and I think I have earned it. The proud man is not very grateful, for he thinks he gets what he deserves. But the truth of the matter is, none of those lepers deserve to be healed. They were only healed because of the grace of God. I don't deserve any of the good things that I have. I've only been given the good things I have. I've only been looked after through my life because of the grace of God. I haven't been good enough to have my sins forgiven. That's completely impossible. No matter how many good things I've done, I'm always behind. But I've been forgiven by the grace of God. When I was a 21-year-old kid and I first came to Estevan, I had no idea where my life was going to go. I've had a great life. Not because I was so smart, not because I put all the pieces in place, not because I knew what to do and what not to do. I've had a good life because God has blessed me. And that needs to become our attitude. And that needs to become our understanding. There's lots of people talking about being thankful right now, and it's sort of being talked about as in opposition to being complainy or critical or whiny or whatever else. Be thankful. And that's fine. But thankfulness is so much more than just looking for whatever good you can find. Thankfulness is about acknowledging the God who gave you all those things. What Jesus is concerned about with his leprous friends is that 9 of them just went on with their lives. 9 of them just acted like they deserved it. And only 1 actually thought, maybe I ought to go back to the one who gave me this blessing and acknowledge that he did something for me. And that is the difference. Thanksgiving is an acknowledgement that we are not the authors of our own story. Thanksgiving is an acknowledgement that everything we have is because of God's grace and God's goodness. And when I start to live with that understanding, when I start to live with that kind of gratitude, then I see everything else differently. I see everything else properly. I see everything else spiritually. One of my favorite stories from the Old Testament is part of the story of Jacob. You might remember Jacob. He comes from a family that has been promised a great blessing from God. And he and his twin brother Esau have come out, and they are sort of in the first part of their lives kind of battling one another to see who's going to become the heir of this great promise, the one who gets to be blessed in this great thing that God is going to do. And they scheme and plot against each other, and it's quite a story, really. At one point in the story, when Jacob has made his brother quite upset, his parents want him to kind of get out of the way for a while, and so they send him to find a wife in a foreign country where his mother came from. And so it says that Jacob was going on a journey. And it says that when he reached a certain place, this is Genesis chapter 28, verse 11. It says when he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Remember, listen to that. Who's going to do that? God says, I will do it. I will give you the land. I will bless you. I will give you the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I've done what I've promised you. So that's quite a promise, hey? I'll give you this land, and I'll give you kids, and I'll give you descendants and people, and you'll be powerful, and you're going to have everything you wanted, Jacob. And I love Jacob's response. This is my favorite part. Verse 16 of Genesis 28 says, when Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I wasn't aware of it. How many of us have that same situation? How many of us have been in that same place? And Jacob wakes up and he says, God was here. God is here. I just didn't know it. I wasn't aware of it until now. And so it says, he goes on, he says, surely the Lord was in this place and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? There's no other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Look what he does next, verse 18. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He's worshiping God. That's what he's doing. And he said he called the place Bethel. Bethel means house of God. So Jacob is running from his brother. Everything's chaos, everything's bad, but then he has a dream and God reminds him, I'm looking after you, I'm taking care of you. Stop worrying, stop fretting, stop acting crazy, stop meddling and trying to make anything happen that you can make happen. This isn't about what you can do. I will bless you. I will look after you. I will keep you. I will give you descendants. I will make things okay. I am with you. And Jacob wakes up and says, God was here and I didn't know it. But I do now. And once Jacob knows it, he worships and thanks God, and then he is a completely different person from then on. He becomes one of the pillars of the faith. He becomes one who believes that God is always with him, that God is going to look after him, that God is taking care of him, and he's thankful for everything that happens, even if he doesn't understand. Because he knows God is with him. This year, what I need to remember, this year, what I need to live by, is an understanding of gratitude that says, I'm not just grateful for what I have, I'm grateful because God has given it to me, that God is providing, that God is looking after me, that God is with me. I need to figure out that it's not about my strength, it's not about how smart I am, it's about whether I actually trust God or not. It's actually about whether I believe God is with me or not. It is about being thankful and grateful for what God has done, because then I will trust what he will do. God doesn't need our thankfulness because he's petty. God doesn't need our thankfulness because he's needy. God needs our thankfulness because it indicates we understand. We understand what's going on. We understand who's in charge. We understand how life is actually going to work. When we live thankfully, when we live with this type of gratitude, one of the other blessings that happens is that it just grows. It expands. It infiltrates everything else about us, and everything else becomes better as well. If you were to come to our backyard, you would see Sarah has a couple of places where she's planted a plant called Virginia creeper. I don't know if any of you have Virginia creeper in your yard, but if you have it in your yard, you likely have it everywhere in your yard. Virginia creeper starts off as this little tiny plant, and then it starts to climb up the fence, and it starts to go down the sides, and then it starts crawling over your camper, and then it starts crawling up your downspout on your house, and it goes everywhere. Once you let Virginia creeper in, it just creeps. It goes all over the place. That's why it's named what it is. It's kind of pretty sometimes. But that creeping bit, whether you like it in a plant or not, is wonderful spiritually. Gratitude and thanksgiving work the same way. Once you start to focus on it, once you understand it, it starts to grow, it starts to creep, it starts to spread, and suddenly everything is okay. Everything is something to be thankful for. Everything you can face with gratitude and trust. It becomes how you see things. That's what Jesus wanted from those other guys. He wanted them to see things properly. It's not about them. It's about him. It's about his goodness and his kindness. Back in the Psalms, David, years and years before any of this happened with Jesus, David wrote in Psalm 103 verse 2, he said, "Praise the Lord, my soul, and forget not his benefits." Then he writes that rest of that psalm, Psalm 103, just lists all the great things God does for him. You might want to go read that. Could be a good starting place for this year. But praise the Lord, O my soul, forget not his benefits. Forget him not. Don't forget. We have much to be thankful for, not because we're smart, not because we're great, not because we're wonderful, but because God is. Can we live with that type of thanksgiving this year? Can we see Thanksgiving as more than just looking for good things, but understanding that these things come from God? Can we see our lives in a new way? Can we live in a better way? Can we live with trust and joy and peace and thanksgiving? For Christian people, thanksgiving ought to be just the most natural quality. If we really believe and really understand what's been done for us, then gratitude is our only hope. The cross is all about the fact that God has done what we could not do. The cross is all about God loved us so much that he sent his son. The cross is all about resurrection and new life and new hope. The cross is all about forgiven sins. The cross is all about the counselor who will come to us afterwards. The cross is about all these things that we were given. And maybe Jesus understood that it's not just the lepers who will forget about him and run off and just keep running their lives without ever thinking about being grateful. Maybe he understood that we're going to be that way too. Maybe he understood that 90% of the time we're not going to remember. So he set up something to help us remember. The table is set up, and we do it every week, so that every week we remember who's in charge. We remember what we've been given. We remember who God is and how he acts. We remember what's important. We remember to be thankful and not just rush past it. And so today in this virtual way, we will share together this memory. We will share together this Thanksgiving. And we will pray that this Thanksgiving then powers everything else about us. That we would live through this Thanksgiving all through the rest of this week and the rest of this year. If you want to take your loaf, we'll pray for that at this time. Father, I thank you that you have given us everything we need. I thank you that you've looked after us even when we didn't know what we needed. I thank you that you've looked after us even when we didn't remember to say thank you or when we didn't even know you were there. Father, you said in your word that while we were yet your enemies, you loved us and sent your Son, and we remember that at this time. Thank you for Christ's death on the cross, for his body that hung there for us, that gave us forgiveness. Help us then to live with gratitude. Help us to be thankful. In your Son's name, amen. If you want to take the cup. Father, for the blood of Christ, we are thankful. Help us to not just do this as a ritual or to do this and not think. Help us not to be like those who take your healing and then just forget. But help us to continually run back and rejoice and praise you and thank you for the good things you've done, in particular for our salvation. Father, help us to look forward to our new home and a resurrection. Help us to look forward to a new life. Help us to live with those things in our minds. We thank you for the blood of Christ in your Son's name. Amen. Sarah and I had a weird holiday. It wasn't like any other Christmas holiday we've ever had. It was really quiet. We didn't go anywhere. We didn't do much. But I came back feeling rested, and I came back feeling hopeful, and I came back looking forward to seeing you someday. So I'm hoping that things lighten up here soon and that we can meet back together again at the church building. If that's not possible, we'll keep doing it this way until we can be back together. Make sure you take time to call one another or text each other. Stay in touch with each other. It's not the same as being together, but it's still valuable. Know that we miss you and love you very much, and we'll see you when we can see you. Have a great week.